Her cry, it never reached the air, just a hoarse scrape of breath clawing through her throat. Leora lay crumpled in the dirt, dress ripped, skin streaked with grime and blood. The relentless Nevada sun scorched her bare arms until her skin blistered. Flies buzzed around the gash on her side where the knife had sliced deep. She pressed her hand hard against it, but the blood, it kept seeping. She'd been running for miles, shoeless, hunted, the world blurring in the heat. When her strength gave out, she dragged herself through the dust until she glimpsed the fence of a homestead. Then everything faded to black. Eli Carson was checking the north pasture when he spotted the buzzards. He figured it was a dying foal. The air, it shimmered so fiercely it warped the horizon like a mirage. But what he found, it wasn't livestock. It was a woman, barely alive, dark hair matted with thorns, lips chapped pale, a deep crimson stain spreading beneath her hand. He swung off his horse, dropped to his knees beside her. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Her eyes flickered open, defiant despite the pain. She gasped, voice rough like sand. "Open it, now." Eli paused. For a split second, then tore the dress at the seam. Blood oozed from a deep wound above her thigh. Serious enough to worry him, but not fatal. Not a bullet, a knife cut. He grabbed the canteen from his belt, poured water over it, and she arched with a cry, half fury, half defeat. He tore his scarf in two, pressed one half to the wound, tied the other tight above her side to slow the bleeding. "You'll be fine," he said. She didn't respond. Her fingers, they gripped his wrist, fierce despite the shaking. Her eyes spoke what her voice couldn't. She didn't trust him, but she wanted to survive. Eli hoisted her onto his horse, her weight, almost nothing. He rode fast across the plain, dust stinging his throat, his heart pounding louder than the hoofbeats. The desert, it shimmered under the sun, a haze of heat and destiny. He didn't know who she was, or who had left her to die in the sun like that, but he knew one thing. If he turned back, she wouldn't last an hour. By the time they reached his shack, her pulse was faint. He carried her inside, laid her on the cot, and saw the blood soaking through again. She whispered one word before passing out. "Child." Eli froze. Somewhere out there, a child was waiting for this broken woman. He glanced at the horizon where the heat still danced over the plain. Who would come for her next? And what kind of man had left her bleeding in the sun like that? The shack smelled of pine and stale smoke. Eli set the woman on his cot, her breath shallow, her skin hot like embers. He grabbed a tin basin, filled it with water, and wiped the dirt from her face. Her lashes quivered, but her eyes stayed closed. He'd patched up men before, cowhands mostly, but never a woman. Never someone who looked this lost. He cleaned the wound again, poured whiskey over it, and she gasped. He packed the cut with crushed sage and stitched it as best he could with a needle from his old saddlebag. Her cry was raw, half pain, half anger. "Easy now," he muttered. "You're safe, here." She opened her eyes, brown and sharp like obsidian. Safe. It wasn't a word she trusted. He could see it, clear as day. Her hand twitched toward the knife at his belt. He slid it away, slow, steady, then nodded once. "Not here to harm you." She stared, silent, then let her head fall back. The sun crawled slow across the porch, casting golden stripes through the slats. Outside, crickets chirped, like they were sharing secrets. Eli changed the bandage, layered fresh cloth over the gash, and tied it with a strip of his old shirt. Her pulse, it steadied a bit. He set a cup of water by her hand. When she woke, hours later, she drank it all, eyes never leaving his. He said, "Name's Eli." She hesitated, then answered, voice rough and faint. "Celine." He gave a small smile. That's a fine name." For the next few days, they lived in a fragile truce. He worked the homestead, she watched from the porch, her leg wrapped in cloth. Sometimes, he caught her murmuring to herself in a tongue he didn't recognize. One evening, when the light softened, she looked at him and said, "They took my boy." A pause. "Silas wanted the land my family owned," she said, her voice low, trembling. "He killed my husband for it, then came for me when I wouldn't give it up." Eli froze. She nodded, slowly. "He's 4, still waiting for me." Eli had no words. He sat there, listening to the hum of cicadas, trying to ignore the ache her words left behind. It had been years since anyone relied on him. The war had taken his cousin, left him with nothing but land and memories. He'd learned to live quiet, to never expect company. Years since he'd had someone else's life bound to his. Later that night, when the moon rose high and the plain glowed silver, Celine stirred in her sleep. A whisper slipped from her lips. One word. Silas. Eli leaned forward, frowning. He'd heard that name before. And if it was the same Silas he knew, this quiet desert peace was about to break, fast. By morning, Celine was strong enough to hobble to the porch. Eli found her there, barefoot, holding a cup of coffee he'd left on the rail. The sun was just rising, painting the sky soft pink over the Sierra foothills. She didn't speak, but when he glanced her way, she nodded once. That nod, it said more than any thank you could. He spent the day fixing fences, checking the herd. She followed, slow but steady, her limp easing with each hour. Sometimes she helped, passing him nails or holding the wire taut. Sometimes she just stood quiet, watching the wind ripple through the sagebrush. There was a kind of calm in that, like the world had paused its herding just for a moment. That evening, they sat by the corral, the heat still heavy in the air. Eli rolled a cigarette, offered her one out of habit. She shook her head. He chuckled. "Smart choice. These'll kill a man quicker than any bullet." For the first time, she smiled. It wasn't wide, but it was real. Then she looked toward the ridgeline, and her face, it changed. "2 nights ago," she said softly, "I saw riders far off on the hill." A pause. "Silas has men everywhere. They track trails, trade secrets for coin." All the light drained from her eyes. She said, "They're still out there." Eli followed her gaze, saw faint hoofprints cutting through the dust. "Fresh?" he asked. She nodded. "He won't quit." Eli's gut going cold. He remembered that name from years back. Silas Redding, a man he'd once ridden with, a man who'd traded his honor for blood money. If he was the one hunting her, trouble was near. That night, thunder rumbled in the distance, the kind that promises no rain. Eli couldn't sleep. He sat by the window, shotgun across his knees, watching the yard. When he looked over, Celine was already awake, her eyes open in the dark. No words, just a quiet understanding between two people who'd seen too much. The next morning, she said, "I'll leave. I don't want trouble. For you." Eli shook his head. Too late for that. Trouble's already here. And for the first time in years, he felt that old spark in his chest again. The one that said, some fights are worth fighting. So he stood, loaded the Winchester, and said simply, "If they're coming, they picked the wrong damn homestead." If this story's got your heart hooked, friend, stick around. Go ahead, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happens next. And while you're here, pour yourself a cup of coffee, lean back, and tell me, what time is it where you are, and where are you listening from? The next day came hotter than hell, the kind of heat that makes the air waver and the ground split open. Eli was out by the barn when he heard the first crow call. One call, then another. Crows don't linger for nothing. He walked to the ridge behind the homestead, careful not to stir dust. That's when he saw them. 5 riders, far out but closing. The lead man sat tall in the saddle, hat low, rifle slung easy across his chest. Even at that distance, he knew the swagger. He remembered him from the war. Same unit, different soul. Silas always loved blood more than duty. Silas Redding. It had been years since he'd seen that face, but the memory still left a bitter taste. He went back down, calm but quick. Celine was in the corral, brushing my mare. He didn't need to say much. "They're coming." She stopped, her jaw tightening. "How many?" "5. She looked him dead in the eye. "Then we make them pay." They worked in silence. Eli loaded the Winchester, checked the Colt, then handed her a rifle. She moved like someone who'd done this before, swift, quiet, no fear. They set up near the barn, using hay bales and wagon wheels for cover. The air,
He was thick enough to choke. Sweat stung his eyes, but his hands, they stayed steady.
Eli studied the ground, saw one rider sway in the saddle, maybe drunk or weary from the long ride. He counted on that small advantage as the riders approached, dust trailing behind them like smoke. Silas stopped about 50 yards out and shouted, "Eli Carson, you got something of mine." Eli raised his rifle, but held his fire. "She's not yours. Never was." Silas laughed. "You always were a damn fool, hero. Step aside, and maybe I'll let you keep breathing." That was all Eli needed to hear. His rifle cracked once, echoing across the plain. One of Silas's men dropped clean off his horse. Then, all hell broke loose. Gunfire tore the air. Celine leaned against the barn wall, steadying the rifle with a grimace. She fired a single shot that dropped a rider, then sank to her knees, clutching her side, but refusing to stop. Bullets chewed the wood posts around Eli's head, splinters flying like wasps. A bullet grazed his sleeve, hot blood soaking through. Another struck the barn wall, inches from Celine's face. Silas moved left, trying to flank them. Eli shifted to block him, firing again. His shot knocked a rider from the saddle, face first into the dirt. He felt a sharp sting in his arm, blood running warm, but he kept his focus. Seeing Silas's face again, that same smug grin from the war, it lit a fire in him, hotter than the pain. Celine's voice cut through the chaos. "On your right!" He swung, fired, and watched the last rider spin from the saddle. When the smoke cleared, only Silas stood, looking wild, blood on his face, gun still raised. Celine stepped from cover, hands steady, eyes burning with years of pain. Her voice shook as she spoke. "You hurt my son, you hurt me." The words, they cracked like gunfire before the bullet ever did. Silas opened his mouth to speak, but she pulled the trigger. One shot, and he dropped like a sack of rocks. Silence fell, heavy, unreal. Celine pressed a hand to her bandage, fresh red seeping through the cloth, but her breathing held steady. Eli lowered his gun and met her eyes. They both knew what this meant. Killing a man like Silas, it always brought more trouble. But just how much trouble? Well, that's where things start getting real interesting. They buried the bodies by the fence line before riding west. By the time the gun smoke cleared, the world felt quiet again. Eli and Celine stood side by side, their shadows long on the dusty ground. Silas Redding was gone, and so was the fear that had chased her across half the frontier. They didn't talk much that evening. Eli cleaned his wound by the porch, and Celine sat nearby, humming a soft tune. It wasn't a mournful song anymore. It was something lighter, almost hopeful. When she looked at him, there was a new warmth in her eyes. Not gratitude, something deeper, something that stilled the air between them. The next morning they rode west, toward Arizona. The sky was wide open, the land golden after a night rain. Eli had planned to leave her with her kin and head back home, but somewhere along that road, the idea of parting felt wrong. When they reached the Navajo camp, a small boy came running from one of the tents. "Mama!" Celine slid off her horse before it stopped, dropping to her knees, arms open. The boy crashed into her with a cry that split the air. Eli looked away for a moment, blinking hard. Some things, they hit a man deeper than any bullet ever could. Later, when the boy was asleep, Celine walked over to Eli. "He's my world," she said quietly. "I know," he replied. Then she took his hand. "You saved us both. Don't ride away yet. Stay, a while." He stayed. Days turned into weeks. He helped mend fences, dug a new well, taught the boy how to ride bareback. In the evenings, they'd eat by the fire. The boy would fall asleep in Celine's lap, and Eli would catch her watching him with that same quiet smile she gave him the first night on the porch. One evening, the three of them sat by the corral. Eli told stories from the war, while the boy brushed the mare's coat with small hands. Celine watched them, her eyes soft in the firelight. For the first time, laughter came easy again. One morning the boy came running, holding a small desert flower. "Pa," he said proudly. Eli froze, then laughed, rough and warm all at once. He knelt down, took the flower.
"Thank you, son." Celine stood in the doorway, tears shining but her smile steady. That single word, it had changed everything. They weren't lost souls anymore. They were family. Maybe that's what the West was really about. Not the guns, or the dust, or the endless fighting, but the small miracles that happen when two broken hearts find a reason to keep going. So tell me, friend, if life gave you one more chance to love again, would you take it, or would you let it slip by? If this story touched you, give it a like, and don't forget to hit subscribe for more tales from the frontier. Now, pour yourself a cup of coffee, lean back, and tell me, what time is it where you are, and where are you listening from?